When people hear the name Angelina Jolie, they usually think of beauty. An Academy Award-winning actress, a humanitarian admired around the world, one of Hollywood's most recognizable women. From the outside, her life has often looked extraordinary. Success, fame, influence, a family admired by millions. It seemed as though she had everything anyone could ever dream of. But what if that picture was never the whole story? Because behind nearly every chapter of Angelina Jolie's life lies something far less glamorous. Loss. She lost the family she wished she had as a little girl. She lost the childhood that should have felt safe. She lost the mother who was the center of her world. She faced health decisions that would change her life forever. She watched one of Hollywood's most famous marriages fall apart under the eyes of millions. Again and again, life took something away from her. And each time, the world wondered the same question. How much more can one person lose? Yet somehow, every time life seemed determined to break her, Angelina Jolie did something few people expected. She rebuilt herself. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. She didn't become stronger because life was kind to her. She became stronger because life demanded it. What makes her journey so remarkable isn't that she experienced heartbreak. Millions of people do. It's what she chose to do after the heartbreak that sets her apart. Instead of allowing loss to define her, she transformed it into purpose. Instead of becoming consumed by bitterness, she searched for meaning. Instead of giving up after each setback, she quietly began building a new chapter. Again, and again, and again. Perhaps that is the story people have missed all along. This isn't simply the story of a Hollywood star. It isn't just the story of an actress, a mother, or a humanitarian. It's the story of a woman who repeatedly stood at the ruins of her own life and somehow found the courage to start over. Because sometimes the greatest success isn't becoming famous. Sometimes the greatest success is learning how to keep moving forward after losing almost everything. Tonight we look beyond the red carpets, beyond the magazine covers, beyond the headlines, to discover how Angelina Jolie rebuilt her life, one impossible chapter at a time. Long before Angelina Jolie became one of the most recognizable women in the world, she was simply a little girl trying to understand why her family no longer looked like everyone else's. She was born on June 4, 1975, into what many believed was a perfect Hollywood household. Her father, John Voight, was already one of America's most respected actors. Her mother, Marcheline Bertrand, had once dreamed of building a successful acting career of her own. From their outside, it seemed like Angelina had been born into privilege, opportunity, and endless possibility. But behind the closed doors of their family home, a very different story was unfolding. When Angelina was still a young child, her parents' marriage collapsed. The divorce changed everything. Instead of growing up in the glamorous Hollywood environment many people imagined, Angelina and her older brother, James Haven, were raised primarily by their mother. For Marcheline Bertrand, the decision came with enormous sacrifice. She quietly stepped away from the career she had once hoped to build, choosing instead to devote herself entirely to raising her two children. It was a choice that shaped Angelina's understanding of love long before she could fully appreciate its cost. Although her father remained a famous public figure, Angelina has spoken openly over the years about feeling emotionally distant from him during much of her childhood. She admired his talent, but the relationship they shared was often complicated, marked by long periods of separation and unresolved emotions. As a little girl, she couldn't fully understand why the family she wished for no longer existed. Children rarely see divorce the way adults do. They don't think in terms of legal agreements or complicated relationships. They simply notice the empty chair at dinner, the birthdays where someone is missing, the silence that replaces laughter. For Angelina, those quiet absences left a lasting impression. She often described herself as an outsider, someone who never quite felt she belonged in the polished, glamorous world that surrounded Hollywood. While many children dreamed of becoming movie stars, Angelina was searching for something much more basic. A place where she felt accepted. A place where she felt safe. Those feelings followed her into adolescence. She struggled with self-esteem and openly admitted that she often questioned her own appearance. Before the world celebrated her as one of the most beautiful women alive, Angelina saw someone very different whenever she looked in the mirror. She felt awkward, different, uncertain. She once spoke about feeling disconnected from their expectations placed upon young women in Hollywood. Rather than fitting neatly into the image of the perfect actress, she found herself drawn toward people who also lived on the edges of society: artists, outsiders, and those who carried emotional scars of their own. As a teenager, that sense of not belonging grew even stronger. She experimented with different styles, challenged authority, and searched constantly for an identity that felt authentic. To the outside world, those years were often labeled as rebellious. But viewed more closely, they reveal something deeper. They were the years of a young woman trying desperately to answer one simple question: who am I? Behind every difficult decision was a young person searching for stability after growing up in a family forever changed by separation. Yet even during those uncertain years, one source of strength never disappeared. Her mother, Marcheline Bertrand, rarely pushed Angelina toward fame. Instead, she encouraged curiosity, compassion, and independence. She taught her children that kindness mattered more than popularity, that integrity mattered more than public approval. Those lessons would remain with Angelina long after childhood had ended. At that time, however, she could not yet see where those values would eventually lead her. All she knew was that she felt different. Different from her classmates. Different from Hollywood. Different from the life everyone expected her to live. Ironically, it was that very feeling of never belonging that would one day become the foundation of everything she would accomplish. Because the little girl who spent years searching for her place in the world would eventually stop asking where she belonged and begin asking a far more powerful question: how could she help people who felt exactly the same way? That question would change not only Angelina Jolie's life, but the lives of millions of people she had never even met. For many young actors, success in Hollywood becomes the ultimate goal. The leading roles, the awards, the magazine covers, the red carpets. Angelina Jolie achieved all of those things while she was still remarkably young. By the late 1990s, her career was accelerating at an extraordinary pace. Her performances in films like Gia and Girl Interrupted earned critical acclaim, culminating in an Academy Award that placed her among Hollywood's brightest stars. To the outside world, it looked as though she had finally found everything she had been searching for. But something still felt incomplete. Years later, Angelina would admit that despite all the success, she often struggled to find a deeper sense of purpose. Their applause faded. The premieres ended. The cameras moved on. Yet the questions she had carried since childhood remained. What truly matters? What kind of life do I actually want to live? The answer arrived unexpectedly in the year 2000, when she traveled to Cambodia while filming Lara Croft Tomb Raider. At first, it was simply another international movie production. But once filming ended each day, Angelina began exploring areas far beyond the movie set. What she encountered changed her forever. She met families who had survived years of conflict, children growing up without security, communities rebuilding their lives after unimaginable hardship. Many had lost everything they once called home. Yet despite living through circumstances most people could hardly imagine, they continued to hope. For Angelina, the experience was deeply personal. She later described feeling something awaken inside her, an understanding that the world was far bigger than Hollywood, and that her own struggles suddenly looked very different when placed beside the suffering she witnessed. It was pity she felt. It was connection. For the first time in years, she found herself surrounded by people who also understood loss. People who knew what it meant to rebuild after life had fallen apart. That realization became a turning point. Soon afterward, Angelina began working with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, better known as UNHCR. What started as a single visit gradually became a lifelong commitment. Unlike many celebrity humanitarian trips that last only a few days, Angelina kept returning. Again and again, she traveled to refugee camps across Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. She listened far more than she spoke. She spent time with families away from television cameras. She wanted to understand their stories before telling them. Many aid workers who met her during those early years were surprised by how seriously she approached the work. She wasn't interested in publicity. She asked detailed questions. She studied the political and humanitarian challenges facing displaced families. She stayed longer than expected, and she kept coming back. Then came another life-changing decision. During one of her visits to Cambodia, Angelina met a young baby boy living in an orphanage. His name was Maddox. Their connection was immediate. In 2002, she adopted him, becoming a mother for the first time. It was a decision that reshaped her entire life. For Angelina, motherhood wasn't simply about expanding her family. It gave her something she had quietly been searching for since childhood: a sense of belonging. She once admitted that becoming a mother changed the way she viewed herself. For years, she had searched for purpose through career achievements. Now she found it through responsibility, through love, through building a home for someone else. That transformation marked the beginning of a completely different chapter. Hollywood was no longer the center of her world. Films became only one part of her life. The rest was devoted to raising children, advocating for vulnerable communities, and using her influence to bring attention to people whose voices were rarely heard. The little girl who had once wondered where she belonged gradually discovered an unexpected answer. She belonged wherever she could make someone else's life a little better. It was a profound shift. Angelina Jolie had entered Cambodia as one of Hollywood's biggest movie stars. She left with something far more valuable: a mission, one that would redefine her career, reshape her identity, and guide nearly every important decision she made in the years that followed. But even as she finally discovered that purpose, life was preparing to test her in ways she could never have imagined. Because the greatest losses of Angelina Jolie's life had not yet arrived. If Angelina Jolie's childhood taught her that life could change without warning, adulthood would teach her something even harder: that no amount of success can protect the people you love. By the mid-2000s, Angelina appeared to have built the life she had always dreamed of. Her career was thriving. Her humanitarian work had earned global respect. She had become a devoted mother. And she was beginning a new chapter with Brad Pitt, a relationship that captivated the world. For the first time in years, it seemed as though life was finally beginning to make sense. But beneath that sense of stability, another battle was quietly unfolding. Her mother, Marcheline Bertrand, had been fighting ovarian cancer for years. It was a deeply private struggle, one the family intentionally kept away from the public eye. Angelina continued working. She continued traveling. She continued raising her growing family. Yet every free moment she could find was spent with the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams so her children could pursue theirs. Marcheline had never pushed Angelina toward fame. She had taught her something far more valuable: compassion, resilience, and the courage to live according to her own values, even when the world expected something different. When Marcheline passed away in January 2007 at the age of 56, Angelina lost far more than a parent. She lost her safest place, the person who had believed in her long before anyone else did. Friends later described Angelina's grief as profound but intensely private. She rarely spoke publicly about the depth of that loss. Instead, she carried it quietly. Years later, she would admit that not a single day passed without thinking about her mother. Rather than allowing that grief to consume her, Angelina made a decision that reflected everything Marcheline had taught her. She chose to honor her mother's life by living with even greater purpose. She devoted more time to humanitarian work. She became even more intentional as a mother. She tried to pass the same values of empathy and independence on to her own children. But life was finished testing her. In 2013, Angelina shared another deeply personal chapter with the world. After learning she carried a BRCA1 gene mutation, doctors told her she faced a significantly increased lifetime risk of developing breast and ovarian cancer. It was the same disease that had taken her mother's life. For many people, that diagnosis would have been paralyzing. Angelina approached it differently. Rather than waiting and hoping for the best, she chose preventive surgery. She underwent a preventive double mastectomy, later followed by surgery to reduce her risk of ovarian cancer. These were intensely personal decisions. She chose to speak publicly about them not to invite sympathy, but to encourage women around the world to learn about their own health and options. Her openness transformed a private medical decision into a global conversation about early detection, genetic testing, and informed choice. Once again, loss became purpose. Instead of allowing fear to define her future, she used her experience to help countless others. Then came another chapter few people expected. After more than a decade together and 2 years of marriage, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt separated in 2016. The breakup quickly became one of the most closely followed celebrity stories in modern history. New headlines appeared almost every day. Speculation replaced facts. Private family matters became public entertainment. For Angelina, however, the headlines represented only a small part of their reality. Behind the media coverage were 6 children navigating enormous change. Whatever emotions she was carrying herself, she knew they were watching how she responded. Rather than engaging in endless public battles, Angelina gradually shifted even more of her energy toward creating stability for her family. She reduced certain professional commitments. She spent more time at home. She focused on helping her children adjust to a life that looked very different from the one they had known before. Looking back, a pattern begins to emerge. Every time life asked Angelina to let go of something she loved. A parent, her health, a marriage. She responded in the same remarkable way. She refused to let loss become the final chapter. Instead, she allowed it to reshape her into someone even more compassionate, even more resilient, and even more determined to protect the people who depended on her. The world often saw tragedy. Angelina saw responsibility. She couldn't control everything life took away, but she could choose what she built afterward. And after enduring some of the greatest losses of her life, she turned her attention toward building the one thing she believed mattered most. A home where her children would grow up feeling safe, loved, and free to become whoever they wanted to be. After years of loss, Angelina Jolie made a quiet but life-changing decision. She would no longer build her life around Hollywood. She would build it around her children. For decades, the entertainment industry had defined success through box office numbers, awards, and public attention. Angelina had already experienced all of that. She knew what it felt like to stand on the biggest stages in the world. But after everything she had endured, those achievements no longer carried the same meaning. Her greatest role wasn't waiting on a movie set. It was waiting at home. As a mother of 6 children, Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, Knox, and Vivienne, Angelina faced a challenge unlike any film she had ever made. She wasn't simply raising 6 children. She was raising 6 completely different individuals, each with their own personality, their own dreams, their own way of seeing the world, rather than trying to shape them into a single image of success. Angelina chose a philosophy that surprised many people. She never wanted her children to become copies of herself, and she never expected them to follow her into Hollywood. In interviews over the years, she has repeatedly explained that she encourages her children to discover their own passions, whether those passions have anything to do with acting or not. Some have shown an interest in filmmaking, others in music, some in humanitarian work. Others prefer to remain almost entirely out of the public eye. Angelina has respected every one of those choices because she understood something many celebrity parents struggle to accept. A child's identity should never be determined by a famous last name. That belief shaped the atmosphere inside their home. Education was never limited to classrooms. Her children learned about different cultures by traveling. They visited countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. They met people whose lives looked nothing like their own. Instead of seeing the world through television screens, they experienced it firsthand. Angelina wanted them to understand that privilege comes with responsibility. She encouraged them to learn languages, to ask questions, to respect different traditions, to understand that every person, regardless of where they were born, deserved dignity. In many ways, she was passing on the lessons her own mother had given her decades earlier. Compassion before popularity, character before reputation, purpose before recognition. At home, Angelina also tried to create something she herself had long searched for during childhood. A place where her children felt emotionally safe. A place where they could express themselves without fear of judgment. She has often spoken about wanting her children to know they are loved not because of what they achieve, but simply because they are her children. That philosophy became especially important after the family's separation. The public saw legal proceedings, headlines, court documents, but behind those headlines was a mother trying to preserve normal moments for 6 young lives. Family dinners, movie nights, conversations, birthdays, simple routines that reminded her children there was still stability, even while the outside world seemed consumed by speculation. Professionally, Angelina also began making different choices. She accepted fewer acting roles than many expected. Instead, she devoted more time to directing, producing, and selecting projects that reflected her personal values. These decisions often gave her greater flexibility to remain close to her children, while continuing to tell stories she believed mattered. To some observers, it looked as though she was stepping away from Hollywood. In reality, she was walking away from her career. She was redefining it. For Angelina, success was no longer measured by how many films she made each year. It was measured by something much quieter. Was she present for the people who needed her most? Looking back over her life, a remarkable transformation becomes clear. The little girl who once searched for a place where she belonged had become the person creating that place for someone else. Everything she had lost, the broken family of her childhood, the grief of losing her mother, the fear brought by serious health decisions, the end of a marriage watched by the entire world. None of those experiences disappeared, but instead of allowing them to define the atmosphere inside her home, Angelina used them to build something entirely different. A family grounded not in perfection, but in resilience. And perhaps that was the greatest reconstruction of all. She didn't rebuild the life she had once imagined. She built a new one rooted in love, purpose, and the hope that her children would grow up carrying fewer burdens than she once did. There is a quote often attributed to the writer Ernest Hemingway. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places, whether Angelina Jolie ever thought of those words or not. They seem to describe her life with remarkable accuracy. When people look at Angelina today, they no longer see only the rebellious young actress who shocked Hollywood in the late 1990s. They no longer see only the glamorous movie star walking the red carpet. And they certainly no longer see only one half of the celebrity phenomenon once known as Brangelina. The woman standing before the world today is someone shaped by decades of loss, responsibility, and quiet perseverance. Her greatest transformation was never physical. It was emotional. As a young woman, Angelina often searched for acceptance. She questioned where she belonged. She carried pain that sometimes appeared impossible to understand. But somewhere along the way, she stopped searching for a place in the world. Instead, she began creating one. A home for 6 children. A voice for people who had none. A platform that reached far beyond movie theaters. Perhaps that is why her legacy has become so difficult to define. Was she one of Hollywood's greatest actresses? Without question. Was she one of the world's most recognized humanitarians? Many would say yes. Was she a devoted mother determined to protect her children from the pressures she once experienced herself? Absolutely. But none of those titles, impressive as they are, fully explain who Angelina Jolie became. Because her greatest achievement cannot be measured by Academy Awards, or box office numbers, or magazine covers. It can only be measured by what she chose to do every time life asked her to begin again. When her childhood left emotional scars, she built compassion. When success failed to bring fulfillment, she found purpose. When illness threatened her future, she chose courage over fear. When grief took away the person she loved most, she honored that love by living according to her mother's values. When her marriage ended under the glare of the world's cameras, she focused on protecting her children instead of protecting her image. Each chapter could have made her smaller, more fearful, more guarded. Instead, each chapter expanded the person she became. That doesn't mean the journey was easy, or that she never struggled. Strength is often misunderstood. People imagine strong individuals never cry, never doubt themselves, never feel overwhelmed. Real strength is something very different. It is waking up after life has knocked you down, and choosing to move forward anyway. Again, and again, and again. Angelina Jolie has never claimed to be perfect. In fact, she has often spoken openly about her mistakes, her fears, and the uncertainty that comes with trying to make the right decisions for herself and her family. Perhaps that honesty is one reason so many people continue to connect with her story. She reminds us that resilience doesn't belong only to celebrities. It belongs to anyone who has ever lost something they thought they couldn't live without. Anyone who has ever faced illness, grief, disappointment, or the painful realization that life rarely unfolds according to plan. The difference lies not in what we lose, but in what we choose to build afterward. Looking back across Angelina Jolie's life, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every chapter that appeared to mark the end of her story quietly became the beginning of another. The little girl who never felt she belonged became a woman who helped millions of others feel seen. The actress searching for meaning became a humanitarian searching for solutions. The daughter who lost her mother became the mother determined to give her own children the stability she had always longed for. She didn't escape pain. She transformed it. And perhaps that is the real story behind Angelina Jolie. Not that she lost everything, but that she refused to let loss have the final word. Because sometimes life doesn't become extraordinary when everything goes exactly as planned. Sometimes it becomes extraordinary because someone finds the courage to rebuild after everything has fallen apart. Again, and again, and again. That may be Angelina Jolie's greatest legacy. Not the films she made, not the awards she won, not even the fame she achieved, but the quiet reminder that no matter how many times life changes your direction, you can still choose who you become. And in the end, that choice is more powerful than anything the world can ever take away.